Hey, this is Michael Slapski here, and I'm going to take you on a fantasy breakdown, that is. Breakdown of the visual effects on this fantasy scene of this woman walking through the snow towards this magical castle. Now, there's a lot of tips and tricks in here that I think might be useful for you to know, and if nothing else, let's have some fun breaking this down. As you can see here, we've got the woman going through the snow here. Now, there's obviously quite a few elements of CG going on here. You might have guessed that these energy balls here on the entranceway are VFX, and you also might have guessed the lantern's lens flare is VFX, and indeed the snow is as well. But did you know this little statue fountain thing here? Yeah, I added that as well. Now here's what the original footage looks like without any effects. And you'll notice I've got some very modern "don't bring your dog up these stairs" signs here, and this very modern "drive that way" sign there, because driving that way would be somewhat difficult. Now technically, this sign over here is also a little bit too modern, but theoretically it could be just a board on there with someone hand painted, but you know, we didn't need to cover it up for now. But we definitely need to cover up this modern fire hydrant and this sign here. So the first thing I did was use the After Effects native camera tracker. In a separate comp, I used Colorista to kind of bring up the detail in the shot, some extra contrast and brightness, and boosted the clarity a bit to help give After Effects camera tracker more detail to grab onto. And I masked out the lady there, so her movement there wouldn't throw off the After Effects camera tracker. So it was just her going through there. But that all together gave After Effects a nice track to have. See here, got all these nice little things. And I used the free normalize track script to get everything kind of in the right vibes. Now the first thing I knew I needed to do was to cover up that modern sign, so I found an old looking fountain-y sculpture thing. It looked like this, with a little bit of extra lighting. I grabbed this HDR here, and just kind of moved it where I needed it and matched it in with the camera tracking into the scene here. In order to make it fit neatly into the scene, I needed to apply some blurs to it. You see here at full resolution, this is much too sharp. And as you might know, you can't apply effects to native After Effects 3D layers using the new advanced 3D renderer there that just natively brings in 3D models. So I right-clicked on the layer, and in this Create menu, there's a Create 3D Layer Instance. And what it does, if I turn this layer off, turn this one on, what it does when you first click it is it adds a CC composite effect to the layer and points it at the 3D model and sets it to copy mode. That's all it does. It's just a quick little script basically. And what that does though is it takes the rendered pixel data from your 3D model and just slaps it onto this 2D solid. And of course, to this 2D solid, you can apply whatever effects you would like. So I did some quick levels just to make the color of that light match better. And then a little bit of a fast box blur, a couple different versions of it, fairly small amounts, 0.2 and 0.7, one just horizontal to help just give the idea of motion blur. And in movement, with how quick it's in the scene, you don't really notice this bad bottom part here, especially with all the color grading everything over top of it. But it just helps cover up this really modern stuff over here in the corner there. I mean, if you're seeing that little bit, still shows up at the top. But again, in motion, when you're focusing over here, you don't even see it. It just doesn't distract you. Now, the next thing I need to do is cover up those dog signs. And I decided to put some magical energy balls there. Now the concept of this is that this is a magical castle and it kind of keeps the snow out, and I figured a little bit of symbolic little energy balls at the entrance to this castle would be perfectly good for this fantasy scene and a very easy way to cover up those modern looking signs. This flame ball asset from Production Crate is quite nice, so I placed them where I wanted them to be in this scene and then pre-composed them because I knew I was going to want to apply effects to them. So here in the pre-comp, they're actually in their 3D positions. Then in the main comp, it's just a 2D layer, so I can apply effects to it. But if you tick this continuously rasterize button, it'll place them in 3D space and it'll respect the camera movement in your main comp. Now, you'll see she goes over top in front of them. So the first thing I did was rotoed out the lady here, and I used the set matte effect on this layer to point it at the roto. So again, an easy way to get something going in front of 3D layers there. Now, as far as the effects on this layer go, I applied an optical glow just to give them some atmosphere, and I put that below the roto. So you see it's like they have some atmospherics, and then she's occluding them. And then over top of that, I put another copy of optical glow, so it will kind of wrap it around her and just really make it feel like that she's in the scene with these balls of energy. So here they are without the effects, and here they are with the effects. Really just helps sell that they're all in the scene together. You know, sometimes it's a good idea to just cheat and let your viewer's eye do the trick for you. You'll see here in this shot, I don't actually have anything happening with these flame balls to make it appear like they're behind the tree that's right there. But the way the flame ball is moving and the way that plant is moving in front of it, it just, and how sparse it is, it really just makes the viewer's eye kind of assume it's in front of it, and I didn't really have to do anything. The next thing I had to worry about was putting in the lens flare for her lantern. And the first thing I did for that was I used Spot Clone Tracker to track the lamp. I use Spot Clone Tracker to track the position of the lamp because it's faster than After Effects Native Point Tracker, and it gives you some nice scale and rotation information pretty much automatically. And in tracker only mode, you don't have to worry about it messing with any of the pixels of your footage, and then you just hit create null, and whether you got position, scale, rotation, it'll make a null for you that's got all that info on it. You can see it right here. I just needed the position in this case. And then as that lamp moves through the scene, in case I needed to offset the real lens flare around, I made a second null that I then parented to this one. Now, the way I made this null was in the real lens flare's effect on any position parameter in an effect in After Effects. You can right click on it, and under Keyframe Assistant, you can say null controllers for positional points. And what that does is it makes a null object and then points at it with a very handy expression. That means even if you parent this null object to things or make it 3D, the 2D point will always follow its apparent position in your comp. And that way I didn't have to worry about it being parented and writing my own expressions. It just did it all very nicely for me. Now, Real Lens Flares is one of my favorite Red Giant tools because it gives me all the realism that I've ever wanted from a lens flare plugin, especially when it comes to obscuration. Most lens flare tools just dim the flare down as it's going behind something, but Real Lens Flares actually reflects whatever's obscuring it in all the reflections. And in this case, if I zoom in on the footage here, you'll see that her lantern light, especially if there's a flare coming out, should definitely be getting blocked by these bars here. Now, the easy way to make that happen is I made a copy of the footage. If I just solo it here real quick, this is just a copy of the footage with a levels effect applied, and I just crunched it up to make this area be very bright with blackness around it. I covered this in a tip Tuesday, but I'm going to point it out real quick. When I crunched it, you still get a lot of color detail here in the stairs, but you notice it's kind of just red and yellow. The color info in the red channel, very visible in the stairs, and the green as well because it's yellow. But in the blue channel, there's really no color information at all except right here in the bright spot, which is perfect because you can use Real Lens Flares obscuration to point at the blue channel. So here's a quick look at what the lens flare looks like with no obscuration at all, which is nice. It's a very beautiful, very realistic lens flare, and especially these reflections morphing and moving as the flare moves are quite lovely. But when you add the obscuration onto it, it adds so much detail. As she moves and a light source moves behind and the lamp swings, you get all this lovely detail through these reflections that is just absolutely stunning. It's just my favorite thing. Now, once I got that sorted, it was time to worry about the snow. The whole reason I started working on this shot in the first place was I wanted to try out using Red Giant's new depth generator to mask out Trapcode Particular particles. My Trapcode Particular setup was not very complicated, just a large box emitter. You can see everything I changed is in this brighter color, and all the defaults are in gray. Just kind of moved it exactly where I needed it to be. No velocity. Mess with the particle life and how much the size of the particles affects the air resistance of them. And the size over life ramps up real quick in case some of those weren't quite out of camera when they first get born. You wouldn't really notice them popping into existence and then have their opacity kind of dropping down over life. So as they get to the ground, they just kind of disappear. And change the color just a little bit to give them the same kind of shade as the scene's lighting. And the environment is where I did most of the work in getting it to kind of feel like it's moving like falling snow, with just the wind blowing it kind of downward and a bit of air turbulence. But the real key to getting to fit into the scene is down here at the bottom under the visibility settings. I've set my Z buffer to be the pass from the depth generator. If I brighten up the scene a bit, as you adjust these settings, you can say how much of the particles are obscured by the different levels of depth in the depth generator footage. Here's what the snow would look like without any obscuration at all. And a bit of motion blur really helps sell the particles are being shot in the scene. And the next step is to do the color grading. I wanted it to have a nice fantasy look, and I went, of course, with Magic Bullet looks. It's a great tool for doing film emulation and, of course, getting an overall look to your scene. And I'll walk you through the steps of how I did it on this shot. First thing was just a bit of optical diffusion. You barely notice the difference. You just kind of see it lightening up a bit there, off and on. Or on the scopes, you can see a bit of a change when I turn between the two. But the point of a lot of these tools is just to add some subtle imperfections to make the VFX and everything feel like they were all shot together with the same camera. For example, this chromatic aberration here, you probably don't even notice it off and on much of a difference because the settings are very low. But if I zoom in here real quick, you can see before and after, there's just a very subtle change that just helps to sell everything. This lens distortion is similar. Negative 6.1 is all I've done. It just pulls the edges just a little bit. And again, it helps the snow and the 3D model that was over there and everything just feel like it was shot with the same lens. And just a bit, like a tiny touch, 0.15% of this edge softness just to make it feel like it's part of the real lens and to take a little bit of the edge off the chromatic aberration. Now it comes down to some more of the coloring aspects of it. This instance of Colorista here really helps things pop with a bit of extra contrast, and I messed with a saturation by luminance. So the darker areas have almost no saturation at all. See right here if I turn them all down. Where it's bright, there's color, and when it's darker, there's less color. It just kind of makes it feel moodier and more fantasy, which I like. And then I wanted that darker area to be a little bit bluer. So this instance of Colorista, I made the shadows bluer and tweaked the overall temperature a little bit as well to kind of give it this look. Some clarity to make it pop just a little bit more detailed, especially it helps with the diffusion there. And then a bit of halation and some renoiser, which is a film grain emulation. Another quite handy thing about Magic Bullet Looks is this reference library up here. At any point while you're working, you can hit this little take a picture button and it'll pop it up here in this reference library. So you can pick a reference and you can A, B between what you're working on. And of course, with this library open, you can also add images from anywhere on your computer. And it's just a great way to either try to match color between a shot or from a different reference, or just to see how you're going. If you can say, you know, do I like what I did before or do I like what I'm doing now? For example, if I turn off this instance of Magic Bullet Looks and load this one up, this is where I was working on the more spooky looking version of it. I can look and say, hey, do I want the more fantasy or the more spooky version? And this reference library here, it sticks with you through any instance of Magic Bullet Looks. So if I open Magic Bullet Looks in Premiere Pro, I'll get to see these there as well, or any other host for Magic Bullet. It's just a great way to have a little library on hand so you can make sure you know what you're doing. And there's one more little trick I want to talk to you about. I really want to make sure her dress would pop. Back down on the original copy of the footage, I've got Colorista here. And did you know that Colorista has a little keying option down here? So on the original footage, I hit edit. And here in the keyer, you can grab colors and add to them. And I pulled out her dress. And when you do a key down there, it means anything you do in this instance of the Colorista effect will affect just the area that you've keyed. So, as you can see here, it makes that blue on her dress pop just a little bit more. I've pushed up the midtones and shadows and highlights different areas and bumped the exposure up significantly. So if I turn everything else back on, you can see before and after, it really just adds that little extra kick of color to her that makes her stand out in the scene as our heroine even more. Here again, before and after, and at the very end, before and after. It really makes that blue come out and pop against the yellow of the rest of the scene. So I hope you enjoyed this little bitty breakdown of the visual effects on this fantasy shot. If you did like it, make sure you hit the like button and maybe ask questions in the comments or just tell us how much you enjoyed it. And if you make any visual effects shots using Red Giant tools, make sure you tag Maxon Red Giant on social media channels because we all love seeing what you make with these tools. See you next time.